I was just 9 when my mother died, and everything fell apart. All I knew and felt safe in appeared to vanish with her. The glue keeping my life together, and the one making everything seem normal, has been my mother. I felt lost without her, as though the ground had been lifted from under me. For a while, I assumed my dad, who was in his mid-30s at the time, would step up to provide the necessary support. After all, he was my dad. Wasn't he meant to be keeping our lives together? Shorty alert. We managed for a brief period following Mom's death. It was just him and me, trying to make sense of an alien and empty life. He would drive me to school and we would have dinner at home, regular activities that felt hollow but at least constant. However, that sense of consistency fell apart when he began seeing someone else approximately a year later. Linda was 12 years younger than my dad. I very clearly recall her first visit to our house. She tried too hard to be friendable and grinned a lot. Even at 9, though, I observed how she gradually entered every aspect of our lives and moved as though she had been there always. Soon, her 17-year-old daughter Allison was living with us as well. Clearly from day one, she was spoiled. Linda seemed to have seized control, and my dad allowed her. Any chance I had to feel as though I belonged was still gone quickly. Then things went bad. It was like I was there but not really there, handled more like a shadow than a daughter. They didn't treat me like a young child adjusting after losing her mother. No, they gave me maid treatment. While I was doing the housework, Linda flowed over Allison, giving her all the attention. I had to learn that this was my new existence. I could not challenge it. Allison left messes all over and behaved more like a young person than someone on the verge of adulthood. I cleaned dishes and swept the floor while she was lazing in front of the TV or out with friends. Regarding my dad, he did not even raise a finger to alter circumstances. He sat back, disengaged, as though this was only the natural sequence. Christmas really stung, though. It was as though he had abandoned me to satisfy Linda's fantasy of our new family. I still get my hands clenched from the memories. My dad, Linda, and Allison scheduled a mountain cabin getaway that year. When I heard about it, part of me brightened. It was Christmas. Surely I would be among them too. But no, they informed me I was remaining behind to tend to Allison's dog, Rusty. It was not just any dog. It was hers, not mine. Linda quickly shot me down, stating it would be a waste of money when I proposed we bring Rusty to a kennel or pay a pet sitter. "You can watch him," she added. I was 9, and they left me alone in the house with a dog while they celebrated Christmas away. I will never forget how that evening felt. I felt abandoned as I sat in the low-light living room and heard Rusty claw the floor. Christmas was here, and I was meant to be surrounded by family rather than left alone looking after a puppy. That my dad had agreed to this broke me. He had not insisted I come along or battled for me. That evening altered everything for me. He had just let Linda run the show. That was the instant I understood I was an afterthought and not a member of their new family. I sensed an increasing gulf between my dad and me from Christmas on. Life has its turns. Soon enough, I would find out that even if I was not totally alone, the road ahead would not be any simpler. After Christmas, everything simply spiraled farther downhill. Not the man I had looked up. Linda's authority over the house grew more robust, and it didn't take long for me to realize that my job was live-in maid rather than daughter. By the time I was 12, I was the one doing laundry, dishes, cleaning, you name it, most of the housework. Anytime I mentioned how unfair it was or hinted at needing help, Linda would smile that fake, saccharine smile and say, "Good practice for when you have your own home someday." I was 12. I wasn't even old enough to cook a proper meal. Allison was still the golden child. She knew just how to play her mother at this point. 19 years old. Allison would magically recall an urgent piece of homework or a meet-up with pals anytime Linda seemed ready to assign her a chore. Linda would always let it fall away. She would comment, "She's got a busy schedule," while I cleaned flooring or swept up after late-night family dinners. My dad's silence made things worse. They treated me as though I was invisible and paid for background help. Sitting in his reclining chair watching TV, he would pretend not to see Linda guiding me like a servant. He never once told Allison to pitch in or stood up for me. I didn't know if he simply didn't care or if he was too afraid of facing Linda. Either way, it hurt. By the time I turned 14, I had reached my breaking point. One evening, once I had completed an apparently never-ending list of duties, I tried to chat with my dad. I caught him seated by himself after waiting until Linda and Allison left. My voice faltered as I described how I felt, that it was unfair I was doing everything while Allison did nothing. His answer was a long sigh and a dismissive, "Life's not always fair. You just have to live with it." That line really struck me like a gut check. No empathy, no validation. After that, I stopped expecting him to be on my side. But not everyone turned a blind eye to what was happening. Ever since that terrible Christmas, my Aunt Sharon, the sister of my mother, has been following in on me. She would drop over to see how I was doing on birthdays, holidays, and occasionally on arbitrary weekends. The only link I had left to the time things made sense was Aunt Sharon, a gentle, consistent presence in my life. Tara, her daughter, was a few years older than me, and over time she evolved into the kind of big sister I never had. Aunt Sharon would invite me over for a weekend whenever things became too much at the house. Anything to provide me a respite from Linda's relentless demands and Allison's entitlement. Tara and I would hang out, see movies, and go for ice cream. Tara knew exactly what was happening. She listened to my experiences and saw the tiredness in my eyes without making me feel as though I was acting dramatically. I told her one evening about Linda screaming at me for not swiftly enough clothes folding. Tara's answer was basic, but really got me. "You know this isn't normal, right? You shouldn't be handled like Way." Her comment seemed to have something snapped into place. I had not understood how incorrect it all was. I had spent so much time believing this was just way life was meant to be. But Tara's comments really let me see. From that point, something changed inside me. There was another way to life, a better one from which I was not merely an afterthought. Giving up thinking my dad would defend me, I stopped trying so hard to satisfy Linda. I spent more time with Tara, concentrated more on academics, and made every effort to schedule personal time. I did the housework as I had no option, but I stopped allowing it irritate me. Though I knew I had to live with it for now, eventually I would be free. That day arrived when I reached 18 and was admitted with a full scholarship to college. It was strange, like a lighthouse at the end of a tunnel I had been traveling down for years. Linda hardly said goodbye the morning I was scheduled to leave. She simply mumbled, "Good luck," with a bored wave, and resumed her daily ritual. Allison hardly pretended to be sympathetic, but my dad seemed actually depressed for the first time in years. The words seemed empty as he held me, an uncommon gesture, and said, "I'm proud of you." Where was this pride while I battled for so many years? I did not, however, linger over it. At last, I was free. All that counted was that college was a breath of fresh air. I was enjoying my own life, meeting friends, and not continuously depressed by housework and unseen limits for the first time. Sending me care packages and visiting when they could, Aunt Sharon and Tara remained my support system. Of course, peace doesn't last forever, and it didn't take long before drama tried to drag me back in. These were my real family, the ones who showed up when it counted. In half of my first semester, my dad called. Trying to be laid back, he began with the customary small chat. Then I heard Jane in the backdrop guiding him on what to say. At last, he got to the point. They wanted me to spend the holidays at home. He presented it as an olive branch, as though they were prepared to treat me as a member of the family. Not naive, though, was my approach. Not because they missed me suddenly, but rather because Jane wanted me there to assist with holiday preparation, saying I would be spending the break with Aunt Sharon and Tara. I gently turned down. Although my dad merely sighed and said, "Maybe next time," we both knew there wouldn't be a next time. He didn't argue. After declining that holiday invitation, I expected some reaction, but there was only silence. I was done posing as though I owed them anything. It seemed like a triumph. It felt freeing to be at last advocating for myself, putting my needs above theirs. I concentrated on my classes, made new friends, and created a life just for me. I became more aware of how unhealthy it had been the more distance I kept between the tumult back home. For once, I was free to breathe. But comma, as always, drama has a way of sneaking back when you least expect it. One day, out of nowhere, I got a message from Allison. It was so surprising that I just stared at my phone for a minute, trying to figure out what she could possibly want. We hadn't spoken in years. Not a real conversation anyway. Allison had always acted like I was invisible unless she needed something. So I wasn't fooled by the sudden, "Hey, how are you? Hope college is going well," message. I knew she was up to something. Sure enough, after a few fake pleasantries, she got to the point. She was struggling with her classes, failing actually, and she needed help. "I know you're really good at this stuff, and it would mean a lot if you could help me out," she wrote. Translation: she requested me to finish her homework. It was nearly laughable. This was the same Allison who never lifted a finger to aid me, who acted like I didn't exist unless she wanted to boss me about. And now she had the guts to approach me for help? I sat there for a bit, wondering about how to answer. Part of me wanted to unleash years of pent-up rage, but I knew it wouldn't be worth it. Allison wasn't worth that energy, so I kept it brief and simple. "Sorry, Allison. I've got my own work to focus on. Good luck with your classes." Her reply came fast and, predictably, full of guilt-tripping. "I thought we were family," she wrote. "Aren't sisters supposed to help each other?" I almost laughed out loud. Ladies? She never behaved like my sister. After that, I chose to overlook her messages. Naturally, the drama was not done a few days later when my phone rang once more. Jane was the one this time. Her tone of voice suggested that she was enraged. She started a frenzy about how selfish I was for not assisting Allison. She said, as if I owed them my life, "We have done so much for you." I inhaled deeply, clutching the phone tighter. "You should be grateful and ready to help your sister." Keeping my voice as cool as I could, I said, "Jane, I'm not responsible for Allison's life. She has to learn how to cope with her difficulty personally. I'm working on my own right now." That didn't go over. Jane began screaming, charging me with turning away the family. I had heard it all before, the trips and guilt, the manipulation. But now I was not a terrified child. I cut her off in middle sentence. I said with great conviction, "I'm not doing this. I have to go." And I hung up before she could reply. It felt wonderful to stand my ground, but I knew it wouldn't finish here. Not long afterward, sure enough, my dad called. We had not spoken in a long time, hence seeing his name on my screen caused conflicting feelings. Deep down, I knew it was about Allison. Part of me hoped he would call to discuss anything else. But deep down, I knew it was about Allison. He began with some small chat asking how school was going, whether I was doing all right. Then he raised Jane and Allison like clockwork. "I realize things are tight," he added, "but maybe you should think twice about helping Allison out. Jane is highly agitated. It would be difficult to maintain peace." I laughed at the ridiculousness. "Keep the calm?" I asked again. "Dad, where was this peace when I was working in that house and Allison was doing nothing? Where was this togetherness when I was excluded from holidays and treated as if I didn't count?" On the other side of the border, quiet prevailed. His voice sounded exhausted when he did speak at last. "I'm disappointed, but I understand," he said. "Good," I added, "because I'm not changing my mind." I hung up feeling a weird mix of pride and guilt. While standing up for myself felt empowered, the truth of how damaged my relationship with my dad had started to weigh on me. Though not at the price of my self-respect, I wanted to be in touch with him. For a period, there was peace. Just silence, no calls, no messages. It was as though a weight had been taken off, and I resolved to keep ahead. One day, Aunt Sharon called. I jumped into my studies, hung out with pals, and discovered delight in the life I was creating for myself. She merely wanted to follow up with me after learning about the turmoil between Jane and Allison. She reminded me of something crucial throughout hours of conversation. "You don't owe them anything," she remarked. "You have to live your own life." Her words confirmed what I had been feeling and helped me not feel guilty about doing what is best for me. I was not going to allow Allison, Jane, or Dad to drag me back into their poisonous mess. I felt a fresh sense of liberation as I had spent too many years being disregarded and used. And now I was finally building a life for myself, and I cannot let them take that away. I had no need to prove anything to them or correct their issues. My actual family lived in Aunt Sharon and Tara. They had always been there for me without asking anything in return. And for the first time, I was ready to put myself first. Things were at last calm. I had fought back, set my limits, and for a few months there were only peace, not calls or guilt-tripping signals. Feeling more confident daily, I concentrated on my work and education. Still, my anchors, Aunt Sharon and Tara, made sure I knew I wasn't alone by often checking in. Living a life free of constant beck and call felt nice, but as life often does, it threw another curveball my way. I received a note from my dad one evening while preparing for tests. "We need to talk," was the brief and straightforward directive. My heart dropped. Since our last discussion regarding Allison, I hadn't heard from him, hence the abrupt note felt sinister. I argued about ignoring it, but a part of me still clung to that small hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Like a fool, I agreed to see him. We met at the same coffee shop where I had marked my line in the sand months before. I half expected to see Jane seated there waiting to teach me about family loyalty as I entered. But it was just my dad, sitting by himself and appearing older and more worn out than I could recall. As I settled down, the quiet between us seemed weighty. After our required little chat, both of us avoided whatever he had summoned me there to say. At last he groaned and fixed me in the eye. He added, "Allison's in trouble," his voice low and nearly dejected. My stomach started to contract. Again, here we are, I thought. What sort of difficulty? Keeping a neutral tone, I said. "She dropped out of school," he said, staring down at his coffee cup. "She started making some poor choices as she couldn't keep up with her coursework. She is staying with us right now and has a lot of debt. But Jane and I..." The room seemed to close in on me. We cannot keep bailing her out. Had I not seen this coming? Allison had always skated by, depending on everyone else to pick up the bits whenever she fell short. And here was my dad, expecting I would be the one to tidy her mess. And what does it have to do with me? Already knowing the response, I asked. I needed him to say it aloud. He shuffled uneasily in his seat. "We were hoping you might assist her. You are in a better situation now and have that new job lined up. We reasoned that perhaps you could give her a boost." "A boost?" They wanted me, the girl left to run everything on her own, to now save the sister who had never once taken action to assist me. I inhaled deeply and battled to keep my voice steady. "Dad, I'm not accountable for Allison. I'm not sure how many times I have to say this. She made decisions. If those decisions have landed her in a difficult position, that is her responsibility." He didn't answer straight away. I have worked hard to reach where I am, and I am not going to discard that to tidy up after her. Like the answer was lurking in the whirlpool of liquid, he just sat there staring at his coffee. At last, he moaned. "I know. I sincerely do. Still, she is your sister." That marked the turning moment. The resentment I had been carrying about inside me erupted at last. My voice higher than I wanted, I responded, "She's not my sister. She never has been my sister. It was obvious from the moment Jane entered our life who really mattered most. Always Allison. There. Cleaning up after her, left behind while you all took holidays. And now you would have me come in to save her? Not, Dad. Definitely not." His eyes grew wide as he realized I had been keeping in for years what he had not expected me to say. But I still had to finish. "You and Jane chose what you did. You always put her first. And I understood it long ago as well. You will then have to live with those decisions, though. I am not your backup scheme. Help her if you so want. But don't expect me to." The quiet that followed felt stifling. He seemed wounded, really wounded, and for a brief while remorse threatened to seep in. But I turned it down. I had to set my ground. He replied softly, staring down the table and apologizing. There it was, an apology. I had no idea how badly we had damaged you. But it was already too late. Words would not be able to alter the years of my feeling of not mattering. "I know," I responded, this time with a softer voice. "But that's done now." We sat in silence for some time, neither of us sure what to say. I have moved on, so should you. This was it as we stood to go at last. Our most recent actual conversation was, though not a perfect break, it was one. From then on, I concentrated on finishing college, starting my work, and creating a life I could be proud of. I felt lighter, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been removed as I left that coffee shop. Tara and Aunt Sharon stayed my family, my real family, and their encouragement never changed. After that, I heard from neither my dad, Jane, nor Allison. I didn't know. And I didn't care if it was out of guilt or stubbornness. For the first time, I was living for me. And that, more than anything, made all the battles, all the confrontations worth it. I thought locking the door on my dad, Jane, and Allison would be the end of it. I had defined my limits, and for once I was not turning around. Life began to fit really nicely. After graduating from college and landing that job for which I had worked so hard, I at last experienced the independence I had been yearning for since 9 years old. Aunt Sharon and Tara were my constant. It was as though I had entered a fresh chapter in which I could write my own story, instead of one dictated by shame or obligation. They celebrated my graduation with me and showered me with the kind of love that seemed pure and unqualified. We joked, discussed the future, and for once I felt as though I surrounded myself with really caring family members. Tara reminded me of the distance I had gone. She, clinking her glass with mine, said, "You did this. Based on your own." I carried those words with me, especially at times when the past threatened to drag me back. Never let anyone take it away from you. Like the time, only a few months after beginning my new job, I noticed an email from my dad showing up on my phone. The topic line is just current. Though I almost closed it, curiosity won out, and I opened it. The message was brief and practically austere in tone. Allison moved out. Right now, she is attempting to sort things out on her own. Just wanted to know. No apologies, no attempts to shame me into anything, just knowledge. I gazed at it for some time, waiting for whatever, remorse, fury, anything, to boil out. But there was simply none. Realizing that whatever part of me had formerly sought affirmation or inclusion from my dad was now gone, I closed the email and returned to work. Over the next year, life continued to flow in nearly unbelievable directions. At work, I received promotions. I met people who evolved from friends to more than friends, and I discovered joyful pastimes. For once, I owned my life. But I couldn't avoid the sporadic news from home, even in this new chapter. Small-town life has a way of allowing whispers to circulate. I would have heard bits from former acquaintances or students who knew about my background. Apparently, Allison had moved to another state to start over. Still, the same old tales accompanied her. Bad judgments dependent on others to save her. Still, this time I was not among those people. Helping someone who refuses to assist oneself just saps you, as I had discovered the hard way. I thus wished her well in my head and left it be. Dad remained silent. He didn't reach out once more, but I didn't know if it was shame, pride, or just the finality of what we'd said in that coffee shop. And I approved of that as well. I had achieved closure inside myself, hence, I did not need his closure. One evening, Tara and I were sitting on Aunt Sharon's porch drinking iced tea and watching the sunset. Tara had become my sister in every sense that mattered, and I knew who my family was, Aunt Sharon, always reminding me of my mom's spirit. Though we hadn't discussed the past in some time, that evening felt different, like we were both considering how far we had come. Tara turned toward me, a knowing smile on her face. She responded, "You know, you're one of the strongest people I know." My throat started to feel lumpy. "I had to be," I said gently. "But it's not just me either. Without you and Aunt Sharon, I would not have made it." She clasped my hand, and we are nowhere at all. Family stays together, the real type. It was at that instant that I understood the actual definition of family. Blood or common history did not define it. Rather, it was defined by the individuals who showed up, who stuck by you when times were tough, who did not merely say, but rather demonstrated. And regardless of what happened with my dad, Jane, or Allison, I had that. 1 year later, I purchased a little, comfortable house that felt exactly mine. Tara and Aunt Sharon assisted me in moving in. We ate pizza on the living room floor that night, laughing and planning decorations. It was beautiful. I felt great serenity as we sat there surrounded by boxes, and the buzz of a life finally lived on my own terms. I was not in need of the love or approval I had once yearned for from either my dad or Jane. Sometimes life attempts to bring you back into the areas that wounded you, where you felt ignored or used. I had created a life full, warm, and anchored by people who really cared. Moving ahead, though, is about deciding not to let those past hurts define you, not only about physical distance. When I go back to that little girl who sat alone on Christmas Eve looking after a puppy that wasn't hers, I want to tell her everything works out. It's about discovering the people who make you feel noticed and appreciated for who you truly are. And that's what I did. She will find her home, her people, and that she will discover sometimes the family you pick is the one that really counts. I set my family first. It also made all the difference.